This is Bob, Mr. Media Interview. There aren't many people who want to go to prison. Not on purpose, not by accident, not even if they deserve it. Loss of liberty, loss of freedom, loss of privacy, loss of choice. And let's not even talk about toilets and showers. And yet, it's hard not to be curious about the experience. Talking about Lindsay Lohan or Nicole Richie doing a few hours of jail time, or even Paris spending a few weeks in the LA County Sheriff's Hilton. Rasha Drachkovitz takes film crews where few of us want to go, the most dreaded prisons in the world. As producer of the MSNBC documentary series Locklup, now in its 7th season, he's been everywhere from San Quentin to maximum security prisons in Moscow and China. Rasha, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Appreciate your time today. Rasha, of all the places you could go in the world with a video team, you chose prisons. Why?
Well, as a documentary filmmaker, you're looking for stories, and I can't think of a more dramatic place to find stories than in maximum security prison. I'm curious by nature. The moment you walk into a facility, whether it's in China or whether it's in San Quentin here in California, there are a million stories to be told. And for our purposes, it makes for very, very entertaining television.
I have to ask, have you ever been in prison other than as a guest?
No, we do so many prison shows. We have a saying here at the company that somebody from 44 Blue is usually in prison. We do so voluntarily, and we're very, very lucky and fortunate when we do leave. But no, I haven't done any prison time.
You continue to be a guest.
Yes, exactly.
That's good. Was it difficult to sell this concept to the network or any network?
Well, originally it was. There's that kind of hesitancy by the networks to say, what are we really going to gain by it? And but after the ratings of the first one, we did a series about 10 years ago called Behind Bars: The World's Toughest Prisons, and the ratings went through the roof. It was on A&E. And we were the first Western film crew ever to film inside a Chinese security prison, which was pretty amazing, very intense. We filmed in a Moscow prison, an Israeli prison in Hungary, Puerto Rico, as well as the U.S. And it really did very, very well critically as well as in the rating. And then from that, we went on to produce, Lockup for MSNBC. Now it's in its 7th season. It seems like it's on every other night on MSNBC. And we've done other shows. We did Cell Dogs, which is a prison series for Animal Planet about prison programs that help inmates help rehabilitate dogs. Very, very original series. And we have a series on Court TV now called Inside, which also goes into maximum security prisons.
How difficult is it to go into these prisons where you don't necessarily speak the language?
Well, it is, some things are very easily translated, which is conditions. When you see 80 guys in a cell like we did in Moscow, or if you see, an inmate making boxes, 12 hours a day in a Chinese prison, the translation isn't really needed. You get a sense of the environment. We do have translators. We do have officials that can help us and ask the questions. But like I said at the top, Bob, the imagery and just the overall environment is self-explanatory.
Well, why? Why, when you go overseas to do this, you're in China or Russia, why do they want you in their prisons? That's something I imagine a lot of people are curious about.
Yeah, that's a very good question because the conditions are much, much harsher than what we would find here in the States, or let's just say what we would accept here in the States. We were fortunate enough at the time to be part of a prison warden program done by the Criminal Justice Institute in Chicago, and they basically did warden exchanges. They'd bring the warden from Shanghai to the U.S., and consequently we'd send a warden there. And so being able to go in with a film crew, I think the intent on their part was to showcase how effective their systems are, because the recidivism rate internationally is much lower. the irony is because, A, they don't leave, or B, they disappear. But we took advantage of the situation and their hospitality to go in, and again, we were shocked and stunned by some of the imagery. But at the same hand, they took great pride in showing us the way they do things.
Well, and that was the question I was going to ask you. They probably take pride in showing it to you, and then what feedback have you gotten after you've done that? And that would go whether domestically or internationally.
Yeah, typically, especially in the U.S., I think, being a warden or a correctional officer is a very underappreciated occupation. You usually don't hear about prisons unless there's an escape or death row or, an execution. I think it's an opportunity for an institution in the U.S. to showcase what they do and to show the environment. We don't take sides. I think why the shows are so popular, we just hold a mirror up to what's going on inside. And so consequently, it's a fair depiction of life inside these very, very extreme environments. And I do think that's a chance for, whether it's Rikers or whether it's Pelican Bay or whether it's, Portland. We film now in 48 different prisons in the U.S. I think it's a chance for them to showcase what they do and show people, how difficult a job it is.
Have you heard from any of them after the fact, after the thing aired, and where they've said, "Oh my God, I wish we hadn't let you in"?
No, I'd say 90% have been favorable. There's on occasion, where there is maybe a little bit of a sensitive area. We show it all. We show relationships. We show weapons. We show pretty much surveillance footage of riots and fights. So some of the stuff you could say might be a little sensitive, but I'd say 90% have been favorable. They're technically with us the whole time. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I think we just have to accept that that's part of the technology. is that Mr. Media is clearly not the only person trying to get your attention.
Right.
This is Bob Andelman, and this is Mr. Media, the second part of our interview with Rasha Drachkovitz of Locklup. Rasha, how is this season different from those that preceded it on Locklup?
Well, the previous Lockups were survey shows. They were one episode, 1 hour, and in 45 minutes we'd take a sampling look at what life is like inside a different facility. This season, this is called Lockup Extended Stay, and what that means basically is we're spending a lot more time filming, to be specific, 4 months inside a different maximum security prison. The one that will premiere in early September is San Quentin. We spent 4 months this year filming pretty much 24/7, and that's unprecedented. To get that kind of access, and it really has enabled us to tell deeper stories, more of a story arc rather than just a sample show. We can now follow through, let's say, an inmate who's processing in, or an inmate last days before he goes out, into society, or let's say there's a crime committed. In our first episode, there's a stabbing within the first 2 days that we were there. We can then show you how that crime gets processed.
How do you walk a line between these being documentary series and being reality series, which are so popular on TV? It seems like you're farther to the documentary series, but if you're going to follow people this season, how do you keep it on the documentary side?
We're kind of calling them docu-soaps, so it has an element of a soap opera in the sense that, you can come back week to week and see your characters kind of evolving. So it enables us, to tell a very dramatic story in an extreme environment, and have reoccurring storylines and characters, which, again, hasn't been ever done before. So it was quite a task, I got to tell you. Usually we film about 1 hour, 1 week, 1 hour for a lockup. 4 months posed quite a few logistical and security problems for us. Inmates got very familiar with us. They have a lot of time. They can get very, very needy. And we became very well aware early on that we have to kind of install some new security precautions because at the end of the day, we get to leave and they don't, and we just felt that this series put us much more content than we usually have with Lockup.
How do you keep that distance with a crew there all the time? Because obviously, especially if you're going to follow people, you want to build trust, but at the same time, you don't want them to follow you home.
Yeah, it's the logistics of filming inside alone. We're working on lots of levels. It's an extreme environment, so you can't just take your camera. If you see something in the exercise yard and you want to film, it may take you an hour to get out there because you're going through multiple levels. So from a logistical standpoint, we have to be prepared to be aggressively patient with our production. From a kind of psychological standpoint, you're getting verbally abused pretty much the entire time. Our lead directors for the series are both women, and they're tremendous at basically finding a story and telling a story, but a lot of these inmates take advantage of the situation to hurl pretty derogatory terms. And so psychologically, the crews have to be pretty sharp and, thick skin, let's say, to kind of survive what few people get a chance to do.
Have any of your crews ever been hurt on this show?
One of our cameramen was filming. Various prisons at this level have SWAT teams, or kind of quick response teams to address an inmate's gone wild, so to speak. And we were filming a live fire exercise, and a bullet ricocheted and hit our man in the leg. So basically, he was shot in prison. Other than that, we've been part of some very unusual situations. As I said earlier, been verbally abused, but the interesting thing is the inmates will typically be very reserved at the beginning. They won't want cameras. They'll kind of shy away. But then as they get kind of comfortable, they'll actually ask to be interviewed. And one of them got so comfortable recently that he actually started to confess to other crimes.
Oh no!
And
really?
The prison officials were stunned and subpoenaed the tapes, and we weren't able to air those, but they were crucial in a new trial.
How often are you on the scene, I guess I should say, when these are being shot?
Well, what I usually do is go in for the opening shot to meet the warden, to meet the correctional officers, to basically set the kind of game, the rules, because there are quite a few rules we abide by. And what's nice is most of the wardens in the U.S. know about us, know of our reputation, so we get past the rules pretty quickly. But it's a good time to put some face time in to meet the warden, to kind of explain what our objectives are, to make sure we're both telling the same story. And but after that, I have to say, we're a small crew. There's 5. There's a cameraman, an audio person, there's a director, there's an associate producer, and in some cases we have like a runner, although they don't run, but they're there for logistical support, because we've been there before when there's an incident on the yard and basically everybody has to hit the deck and you may be quarantined for 2 hours. So we take great care in who we send out, and take great care in making sure that they're safe at all times.
Do you have contingents from the prisons that follow your people around, or are they just?
Yeah, they usually attach what they call a public affairs officer, who is there basically to make sure we can navigate through various sectors, and in case something goes wrong, they can then help get us out or intercede. When we're interviewing, really kind of level 5 inmates, these are kind of the Hannibal Lecter, the kind that you just don't, want to spend a lot of time. They'll bring in extra correctional officers. We've had that on a number of occasions where the inmate will be brought in with 4 or 5 officers. They're prone to, these inmates are prone to violence. They're prone to, some of them will have the spit guards, because they're prone to that. It's very dramatic, which makes for a good shot, but it definitely heightens the room, because typically these inmates don't have any contact with the outside world other than what their day-to-day interaction is with the correctional officers.
Can the prisoners opt out of being interviewed? Do they have any choice in the matter?
It's funny. It's most of the prisons, they're basically microcosms of small cities. And the inmates themselves, everybody kind of divides into a gang. And that they pretty much kind of dictate the rules of who gets interviewed and who doesn't. We interviewed a member of one gang, and he didn't really say anything that was sensitive, but we found out the next day he was stabbed 22 times for talking to the media.
Wow.
So, we're very careful about, making sure that we're not there to we're there to capture the images, not to become used. And so there's a whole amazing kind of lifestyle of pecking order of generals to lieutenants, sending out information. We found out in one interview we did in Pelican Bay that the inmate was actually sending signals through his answers to the interview, and that tape was subpoenaed as well.
Wow.
So when you have that amount of time, you can be incredibly creative, and when you add that to kind of the dark side, we found ingenious ways that the inmates make weapons, out of kind of the MacGyver effect, plastic, a little bit of fire, and next thing you know, they have a shank. So it's always on our mind to make sure that we're not causing, flaming a situation, and trying to be as respectful as we can.
What's the biggest difference between the public's perception of prison life and what you've found to be reality?
Well, that's a good question. I think, most of the time you're reading about the Scott Petersons or the Charles Mansons or, high-profile inmates that go in, and then basically the story stops. So there's not a lot of media coverage, aside from shows like Lockup or Inside or Cell Dogs. I think that's why the shows do so well, is that, it's a chance to see something you rarely see. But in terms of perceptions, unfortunately, the negative side to everything is that the recidivism rate is high. I think 7 out of every 10 inmates that process through San Quentin end up coming back. So you could have an argument to say, well, then, is the system rehabilitating or just housing inmates? If they're housing, the problem we have here in California is there's no room. You have overcrowding. When you have overcrowding, then you have inmates and gangs now very close to proximity, and you have violence. So I think the perception really comes from shows like Oz on HBO or Shawshank Redemption, where you're seeing amazing, prison breaks and, incredible dialogue. But when it comes down to it, I'd say 90% of prison life is very boring, very routine. Small cells, some of them don't have televisions. Inmates are basically doing time alone. And, it's that 10%, though, that is a flashpoint for violence or for extreme aggressive behavior.
I hope that it's that way in terms of being boring, because if it's all like Oz, I'm sure I don't want to be there.
No.
Go ahead.
No, you're right.
Did any of your political views change as a result of doing this show with regards to prison and jail time?
Well, it does put you in contact with people who should never, ever be released. And will tell you straight out that if they are released, they would commit a crime. So I think I've probably become much more conservative in my views on, death penalty and incarceration. There are some really, really dangerous people, and they need to be in maximum security prisons. So I'd say, if anything, I sleep better knowing that facilities like this exist. But I'd say probably I've gone more conservative because of the series.
Really? I'm not entirely surprised. And the last thing I want to ask you, are there many laughs in this line of work for your crew? I mean, it's obviously it's a fairly grim program. Do your people find much to laugh at when they're working in these prisons and shooting these?
Well, Humor does, humor in intense environments, extreme environments, humor does come into play because it's a chance to kind of break the ice. And there have been times, especially with staff, when you're there 4 months, you're doing time, and they play practical jokes on us, and nothing that threw us off too much. But the staff definitely took us in and kind of showed us. There is a lighter side of prison life. I mean, think about it. It's like I said earlier, it's a city, and so the city life, or whether it's the cantina, and you've got inmates are making money to buy certain products, whether it's candy or cigarettes, or whether it's a rap group out in the yard that can play a very very entertaining song. It has all the elements that a city would have. And one of those elements is humor. So I have to say it's fortunate. You'll see some of it in extended stay. You'll see that it's not just all shanks and riots. You will see a human side, and you will see a lighter side, because that's just part of life.
Well, Rasha, thank you so much for joining us today on Mr. Media.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Appreciate having you here. And remember, you can check out Lockup on MSNBC starting Friday, September 7th. Airs in the evening. Check your local listings for the exact time and date where you are. And folks, if you'd like to keep up with Mr. Media's Friday interviews, you can subscribe to the site via email at www.mrmedia.com. You can also subscribe to the audio and now video feed in the podcast section of iTunes. Thanks for joining us. Come back again next week for another Fridays with Mr. Media.